Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades.
Off the top at 5:30, scientists are learning invasive pythons in South Florida can eat bigger prey than they realized, and that includes an adult deer.
For years, everyone thought they already knew how this story ended. The pythons took over, the swamp went silent, and Florida lost. That was the accepted conclusion. Scientists said it, wildlife managers said it, the public believed it. The Everglades had been conquered by an apex predator that arrived from the other side of the planet, and nothing native could stand against it. But new trail camera footage has revealed something that the experts completely failed to foresee. Deep in the swamp, in the places no human boat can reach, the wilderness is finally answering back. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, the exotic pet trade was booming, and tens of thousands of Burmese pythons were imported into the United States. They were docile compared to other giant constrictors, and they had a beautiful puzzle piece pattern, so people bought them in enormous numbers. The problem is that a Burmese python does not stay small. This animal can grow to over 20 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds. Owners were overwhelmed by the cost of feeding and housing a snake that size, and so many of them did the unthinkable. They drove out to the edge of the Everglades and released their apex predator into the wild.
The whole thing is weird that they allowed those as exotic pets and then these people just let them go in the swamp.
Those scattered releases planted the seed, but the real catalyst, the moment everything exploded, came in August of 1992. Hurricane Andrew, a devastating Category 5 storm, slammed into southern Florida. It killed 65 people and caused around $27 billion in damage. And among the buildings it flattened were reptile breeding facilities sitting right next to the Everglades. In a single night, the storm released an estimated 900 to several thousand pythons directly into the swamp. That was the moment the modern invasion truly began.
Another part of the problem was that there was a wildlife research facility where they were studying pythons. And somehow or another, it got destroyed in a storm, and the pythons got out.
Florida turned out to be the perfect trap. The Greater Everglades stretches across roughly 1.5 million acres of nearly impenetrable wetland, and it looks almost exactly like the native habitat these pythons came from in Southeast Asia. There were no long, brutal cold snaps to kill them off, and there was an endless supply of native prey that had never seen a giant constrictor before. The pythons bred quietly, invisibly, and by around the year 2000, they had established a stable population that no one had noticed. But numbers alone do not explain what happened next, because these were not ordinary pythons. Something in their genetics had made them into something far more dangerous. Before we continue, I would love to know where you are watching this video from and whether you think the exotic pet dealers and owners who released this hideous creature should be held responsible for the terrible destruction the Everglades is suffering. Join the discussion with us in the comments. In 2018, scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey studied around 400 pythons captured across South Florida, and what they found was chilling. The snakes hiding in the Everglades were not all pure Burmese pythons. At least 13 of them carried genetic markers proving they were hybrids, a cross between the Burmese python and the Indian rock python. This crossbreeding created something evolutionary biologists call hybrid vigor. Instead of producing weak offspring, this specific mix produced pythons with the best traits of both parents. They could tolerate a wider range of conditions. They adapted to Florida faster. And most importantly, they were better at surviving cold and other environmental stress. That advantage was put to the test during the record-breaking freeze of the winter of 2009 to 2010. Many pythons died because they could not handle the cold, but a huge number survived by hiding underground in insulated shelters. That freeze acted like a filter. It killed the weak and left behind a genetically superior population that was even tougher than before, clearing the path for the snakes to push north into the Florida Panhandle and beyond. On top of that, these pythons can survive without food for up to 60 days, which makes them almost impossible to starve out. So now you have a genetically enhanced, cold-resistant, nearly unkillable constrictor loose in a wilderness with no natural defenses. And what it did to the native wildlife was nothing short of a massacre. It takes us a lot of time to film and bring you the most realistic perspectives. So if you find this content valuable, please give the video a hype. It is the simplest way to support the channel so we can keep making more videos like this. Once a Burmese python grows past about 16 feet in length, it becomes an expert hunter of warm-blooded animals. It stops bothering with cold-blooded prey almost entirely and turns its full attention to mammals. And the amount these snakes eat is staggering. A single python needs an enormous number of calories to fuel its growth. Researchers performing autopsies have found their intestines packed with as much as 14 pounds of waste, stretched out over 2.5 feet, along with the remains of adult white-tailed deer, rats, and even alligators. The data on what this did to native mammals is almost hard to believe. A landmark study in 2012 by Dorcas and his colleagues used years of road survey data to measure the collapse, and the numbers are devastating. In the hardest-hit areas, the raccoon population fell by around 99%. The opossum population dropped by nearly 99% as well. Bobcats declined by around 87%. And marsh rabbits and foxes reached functional extinction, meaning they essentially vanished from the core region entirely. The reason this happened comes down to one brutal fact. Florida animals evolved over thousands of years without any giant land constrictor in their world. They had no instinct to fear it, no defense against it, no strategy to escape it. The python is a perfect ambush predator with no blind spots, and it simply devoured entire food webs. Places that once echoed with the sounds of nocturnal wildlife went completely quiet. Researchers began calling them the silent swamps. Faced with an ecological disaster of this scale, Florida did not sit back and watch. The state launched an all-out war on the pythons. But what happened next revealed just how powerless human technology really was. State and federal agencies poured millions of dollars into eradication programs. And despite all of that money, logistics, and cutting-edge technology, nothing worked. Today, estimates suggest that somewhere between 100,000 and 500,000 pythons live in South Florida. To understand why humans lost, you have to look at the biology. A single female Burmese python can lay anywhere from 20 to over 100 eggs every single year. The number of snakes you would need to remove just to stop the population from growing is far beyond anything humans can achieve. Consider the Florida Python Challenge. This is a public event that brings in hundreds of professional and amateur hunters to catch as many snakes as possible for a reward. The 2025 event drew a record 934 participants. But even with thousands of snakes removed over the years, that is only a tiny fraction of the total population. Worse, on forums like Reddit, people have pointed out a disturbing loophole. In some areas where hunters were paid by the foot, individuals actually started breeding pythons for profit. And when the program ended, they released them back into the wild, making the problem worse. And most of the Everglades is completely unreachable by road or boat, giving the snakes an endless sanctuary. Then, there were the thermal drones. Researchers tried using infrared cameras to spot the heat signatures of giant snakes from the air. But here is the problem. Pythons are cold-blooded, so their body temperature is almost identical to the swamp around them. Beneath the thick canopy of sawgrass and mangroves, The thermal drones were essentially blind. They even tried a technique called the Judas snake. Scientists implanted radio trackers into captured males and released them, hoping the males would lead them straight to the giant breeding females during mating season. It was clever, and it did help locate some record-sized females and their egg clutches, but it required too many people, cost too much money, and could never scale up fast enough to keep pace with how quickly the pythons were breeding. When human technology hit its limits, it looked like the Everglades were finished. But just as everyone was ready to write the final chapter, a new weapon appeared in the swamp, and it came from a source no one was watching. Did you like this video? Don't forget to hit the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. It was an invasive lungworm parasite called Rhyliatiella orientalis. Despite the name and its worm-like appearance, this is not actually a worm. It is a parasitic crustacean that physically latches onto the respiratory tissue of its host and drinks its blood to survive, using a set of hooks on its flattened triangular head. Here is what makes it so sinister. This parasite came from Southeast Asia and Africa, where it evolved right alongside the Burmese python. In its native range, the python's immune system keeps it under control, so it causes only minor infections. But when the pythons were brought to Florida, they carried this parasite with them, silently spreading its tiny eggs through their droppings across the entire swamp. Native North American snakes have absolutely no defense against it. Inside the enormous lungs of a Burmese python, the parasite is barely an inconvenience. But inside the much smaller lungs of a native Florida snake, it multiplies out of control. The disease it causes, called pentastomiasis, leads to severe pneumonia, tissue damage, and death, with an extremely high mortality rate. Researchers have documented heartbreaking cases where the adult parasites, having killed their host, are forced to crawl out of the mouths of the dead snakes. And a weakened immune system leaves these snakes open to other diseases too. Over 40% of the reptiles studied were carrying multiple pathogens at once, including salmonella, a tick-borne parasite, and a deadly snake fungus. The most terrifying part is that this parasite no longer needs the python at all to survive. It has woven itself directly into Florida's native food web, and it is spreading faster than the pythons themselves ever could. What makes this parasite so impossible to stop is that it has hijacked an entire chain of native animals to keep itself alive. The cycle begins when a mature parasite in a snake's lungs releases eggs, which pass out through the droppings. Native insects like cockroaches and beetles feed on those droppings and pick up the eggs. Then native frogs, toads, and invasive lizards eat those infected insects. And finally, when a native snake eats one of those frogs or lizards, the parasite migrates into its lungs and matures. The python is no longer part of the equation at all. Because it uses frogs and lizards as stepping stones, any native snake that eats those common prey animals is now in danger. The pygmy rattlesnake, a small venomous native that depends heavily on lizards and frogs, has been hit especially hard. Field studies show that the arrival of this parasite lines up almost exactly with a severe collapse of the pygmy rattlesnake population in the Everglades. And this weapon is moving far faster than the python ever could. Monitored by a group called the Snake Lung Parasite Alliance, the parasite has rapidly expanded its reach. As of 2024, it had been documented in at least 35 Florida counties and 19 native snake species, spreading roughly 270 miles northwest into the Florida Panhandle and up to the borders of Georgia and Alabama. It has become an automatic biological trap, turning the swamp's own food web into a weapon. But the damage does not stop with snakes. Because as the pythons emptied the swamp of mammals, they accidentally set off a chain reaction that now reaches all the way to human beings. In a healthy, diverse ecosystem, mosquito-borne diseases stay rare thanks to something called the dilution effect. When a mosquito feeds on many different animals, most of which cannot amplify a virus, the disease stays contained. Before the invasion, a local mosquito called Curiousityx spread its bites across many mammals, taking about half its blood from rodents and the rest from raccoons, opossums, and deer. But then the pythons wiped out the raccoons, opossums, and foxes. Suddenly, the mosquitoes had almost nothing left to feed on except one animal that was actually thriving: the cotton rat. And that is a serious problem, because the cotton rat is the main reservoir of the Everglades virus, a dangerous pathogen that can cause high fever, severe headaches, and in rare cases, life-threatening brain inflammation in humans. The numbers tell the whole story. In 1979, only about 15% of that mosquito's blood meals came from cotton rats. But by 2016, after the pythons had emptied the swamp, that figure had skyrocketed to nearly 77%. For the first time, scientists had proven that an invasive apex predator could rewire an entire disease network and directly increase the risk to human health. And with a new city-adapted mosquito species now appearing in Florida, the barrier keeping this virus out of populated areas could one day break. For a long time, it seemed like there was no good news left in this story. But then a trail camera in the deep swamp captured something that stunned the researchers watching it, and it changed everything. If you are still watching this video and find this information helpful, please comment 2 below to let me know you are here. In June 2021, researchers placed a motion camera at the nest of a giant female python, a snake about 14 feet long, weighing around 120 pounds. They expected to record nothing but long, still days of the mother guarding her eggs. Instead, the camera caught an intruder. A native bobcat, weighing only about 20 pounds, wandered up while the enormous python had briefly left her nest exposed. Recognizing an incredible source of protein, the bobcat began devouring the eggs. It returned 3 times that evening to feast. And the next morning, it came back and deliberately buried the leftover eggs under leaves and branches to save for later. In total, that single bobcat destroyed 42 eggs, wiping out that female's entire reproductive effort. Then came the moment that made history. The following evening, the bobcat returned to its buried food, only to find the 120-pound python coiled up and guarding the nest. Despite the massive size difference, the bobcat did not run. The camera captured the small cat raising its claws and actually slapping the giant python before retreating into the bushes. It is the only known photographic evidence of a native predator standing up to a python in the region. This mattered enormously to scientists. Hunting python nests and caching the eggs are learned behaviors. Native mammals are not born knowing how to do this. That bobcat had to figure out on its own that the eggs were food and that the mother was dangerous. If this learned behavior spreads through the bobcat population, the swamp could develop its own natural brake on python reproduction. And the bobcat is not alone. Black bears have also been documented raiding nests and attacking adult pythons. The bobcats offer hope against the next generation of pythons. But dealing with the giant adults already in the swamp would take a predator built specifically to hunt other snakes. And against all odds, that predator is coming back from the dead. The undisputed native king of the southeastern swamps was always the eastern indigo snake. It is the longest snake in the United States, reaching up to about 8.5 feet, and it is a powerful, non-venomous apex predator. Most importantly, it eats other snakes. It uses its size, its crushing bite, and its natural immunity to venom to overpower and swallow rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, and other serpents whole. But by the late 1970s, habitat destruction and the decline of the gopher tortoise, whose burrows the indigo snake needs to survive winter, pushed the species to the edge. By 1982, it had completely vanished from the Florida Panhandle. Then, in 2017, a coalition led by the Nature Conservancy launched an ambitious 10-year breeding and reintroduction program. Over nearly a decade, conservationists bred, tagged, and released more than 126 indigo snakes into carefully restored preserves. But the true test was never whether the released snakes survived. It was whether they would breed on their own in the wild. The answer came in 2023. Near the Apalachicola River, researchers discovered 2 wild-born indigo snake hatchlings. For the first time in half a century, a self-sustaining population of giant snake-eating snakes was established in the region. The lost king had returned to reclaim its throne. And while the indigo snake is itself vulnerable to that same spreading lungworm, its presence means the Burmese python is no longer the only giant reptile setting the rules of survival in Florida. So this is where the story truly stands. After 20 years of silence, the Everglades are moving again, but not in the way anyone predicted. This is no longer a simple tale of a swamp that died. It has become a complex, multi-front biological war, and the outcome is genuinely unknown. From the south, genetically superior hybrid pythons continue their march north, consuming everything in their path. Spreading invisibly through insects, frogs, and lizards, the lungworm parasite devastates native snakes indiscriminately. And rising up against them, the resistance has mobilized, with intelligent bobcats learning to strike at the python's weakest point, and the long-lost indigo snake reclaiming its ancient throne. The Everglades are not dead. They are evolving into something entirely new, forged in the fire of invasion. And nobody knows who wins. So drop your prediction in the comments right now. Who survives this battle? The expanding pythons, the migrating lungworms, or the recovering native predators? Subscribe, because the swamp has far more to show us, and this story is only just getting started.